Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Cilinix Crypto, or welcome to the channel, of course, as well, if you're new. And welcome to this market update. We're going to do a full crypto market update. We'll talk about everything that's going on. So we will focus on the news that is very much affecting the crypto market right now. We have to talk about that. Then we'll focus a little bit on Bitcoin. The Bitcoin dominance is rising. There's high correlation in the markets. So if we know what's most likely for Bitcoin, we also know what's most likely for altcoins. Then we will focus a little bit on XRP and Ethereum and a couple of other altcoins that I think can actually rally up higher and that I think you need to know about. And that's it. All right. After that, I will no longer bother you and you will be informed about everything you need to know. So let's get right into it. Now, first of all, ultimately at this point of time, Bitcoin is pushing down. It is still holding support. All right. This morning, if you watch my morning update, I said I think it's most likely, given the current fundamentals, which were still not amazing, but we'll get into that in a moment. This morning I said, okay, I think we're going to push down, and then a key support level is at 101,700, but there is some fair value gaps lower as well if we get some bad news, which it seems like we got, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But I do ultimately think, unless we get some very bad news, which I don't think the current news is very bad news. I think that there's some positive notes in that as well, by the way. But again, we'll get to that in a moment. Then we can push down lower. But ultimately, I would say if I'm allowed to give a prediction right now already, I think it is likely we will feel some imbalances lower, but I do think we have formed a strong bottom at 99 and 100,000. And even though we can revisit that level, I do still think that ultimate bottom is going to hold, and I think we'll be able to hold that general support level and get some more recovery into 105,000. Although the move into 105,000, we could also have to wait for that until tomorrow, weekend, maybe next week. Would be late, but okay. So that's generally what I expect. A further pullback for Bitcoin would send us down lower into 95 and 92,000, where you can see on the higher time frames we still have some major support. Like I said, I think that's unexpected. I don't think that's something you should expect based on the current news. Now, the current news, like I said, is not all bad. The liquidity crisis or the liquidity problems we had are still there, or at least that's still relatively recent. But you can see that repo operations have decreased significantly since Tuesday, so that's good news. And you can see the SOFR spread. So basically, if this is high, if this is increasing, that's bad news. So as you can see, it has decreased significantly again over the course of the last 2 days. So in terms of liquidity, that's relatively bullish, but I mean, ultimately it's not fully over yet. There's quite a lot of, I'm not going to go in depth about this, but there's quite a lot of things happening over the course of the next 2 weeks that could crunch that liquidity again. And ultimately at this point of time, what's going on is that there seems to be something else influencing the markets. If you take a look at the volatility index, which is a general gauge, a general indication of unrest that is rallying. It is rallying up to the same levels it was at on Wednesday and Tuesday, and that is not bullish. All right, this is bearish for crypto. Crypto are risky assets, and you can see right now that the volatility index is increasing. Now, why that is happening? It could be for multiple reasons. There's a lot going on right now regarding the US shutdown, but also regarding the tariffs case, which is also increasing volatility and uncertainty, right? Because uncertainty creates volatility, and ultimately both create fear, and fear is bad for the markets. We also had some Federal Reserve speeches today that were not necessarily very optimistic, and you can also see right now, if you take a look at the probability that we're going to get a rate cut in December, that has decreased a fair bit over the last couple of days. It's up and down, but it's no longer as high as it was a couple of weeks ago. So as long as this is going on, and this could be for multiple reasons, right? It's always difficult to estimate what exactly is causing this fear to slip into the markets. It is most likely a combination of a couple of things. Until this is going on, Bitcoin will not bounce. All right, Bitcoin is ultimately fundamentally driven, and Bitcoin will not bounce. Now, I have to be relatively optimistic for two reasons. First of all, we are actually still holding the first support that we had. 101,700 was the first realistic support level on the lower time frames for Bitcoin. And we're holding that with quite a lot of strength. And there's not a lot of volume coming in that's selling, right? I mean, if you take a look at this volume and you compare that to the volume we had buying yesterday, the volume right now selling is lower, and it's much lower than it was on Tuesday. And then outside of that, what I think is interesting is that the volatility index is at the same levels as Tuesday and Wednesday, and it's pushing down stocks quite aggressively. You can see stocks are actually making lower lows compared to Tuesday, and Bitcoin is holding relatively well. That's a great sign, all right? That's a bullish divergence for Bitcoin, and that makes me slightly more optimistic that, yes, again, like I said, we can spike down lower, but I think we are getting fundamental and technical confirmation that this is a local bottom, and then we can expect a bounce. And then when we actually get if the unrest starts to disappear, I think then we can bounce into 105,000. So I'm actually, short term, I think you should be prepared for further spikes down and further bearish pressure. But there's a lot of things that actually make me slightly optimistic here. Now, when we're talking about Ethereum and XRP, the situation is a little bit different. I think Ethereum ultimately will be moving according to what Bitcoin is doing, right? The correlation is extremely high. At this point of time, it's 85%, over 85%. So in that sense, what I expect for Bitcoin, I expect for Ethereum as well. I think XRP, this is what I said this morning. I think this is still very accurate. I'm still very happy with that. I expected us to pull back into that level at 2.25, 2.2, maybe even 2.15, as you can see right here. But ultimately, I also think that XRP fundamentally and technically is strong enough to hold support and ultimately bounce. Now, altcoins, like I said, are in a little bit of a different, difficult situation. Earlier today, we had a couple of altcoins that actually were showing some momentum, and I think that's interesting, but I'm going to be slightly cautious with telling you what I think is interesting. I think something like Syrup is quite interesting. Fundamentally, this is very strong. I think ICP is still quite interesting. I made a full video, a detailed analysis on this morning as well. And last but not least, I also think that Arweave, so that is AR, and these are all unpaid, I mean, of course, but okay, has a potential to break out as well. But would I take trades on any of these? Maybe on Syrup, maybe on Quant. Quant is also quite strong, but ultimately I would be relatively cautious and very careful with trading these while the fundamentals are still risky, okay? So that is what I think you need to know for today. Hopefully it helps. Thank you for watching, everybody. I will see you all in my next videos, and bye.